So thank you for joining us again today. Just give me a minute. In about a minute, I should start with the session. And then we'll see in the meantime if we have a few more people joining us for today's session. Okay, another exciting day. This is a third of our GRE Made Easy series. So I think it should be something I'm sure should be beneficial for all of you who've joined us. I'll try to make it as beneficial as possible for each and every one of you, since you've taken the efforts of putting in the efforts of actually joining. So I think that in itself is commendable. But anyway, all right, it's 5 p.m. Hello, everyone. Welcome again for just a minute. Yeah, all right. Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. So yes, welcome to another GRE Made Easy series by AACC. We are now in the third session of the GRE Made Easy series. So today's session is, as the name suggests, is more about the comprehension passages. So obviously, we are going to look at something that is a part of the GRE verbal section particularly. So today's agenda again is focusing on the GRE verbal reasoning section, but more towards the passages, more towards reading comprehension passages. So what I will try to do today again is give you a sort of approach that you can have when you're solving reading comprehension. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to the GRE verbal reasoning section, the reading comprehension passages are mostly, it takes a lot of time to solve. If you ask somebody who's doing, who's sort of writing the GRE exam or even preparing for the GRE exam, generally speaking, when you ask people, okay, what is this one part of the GRE verbal section that takes a lot of time? Like if you were asked which part of the GRE verbal section is more time consuming, I think most people, in fact, 99% of the people will say that my reading comprehension or passages or passage-based questions generally take more time. So reading comprehension as a task is a more time-consuming task. There is no doubt about that. Because if you're given a passage which is, one anonymous to you, you come across passages which are given to you on topics that are, generally saying like, these are really complex sometimes. The topics can vary from anything related to humanities to sciences. Now, humanities has literally a lot of subjects in it. To sciences, literally all physical sciences, pure sciences, generally speaking, it's so varied, right? From humanities to sciences, you get passages that you might look at it and sort of feel intimidated. Even before you've read the passage, just by reading a couple of words, you're already under this mindset that, oh my God, I can't read this. I just won't understand a thing. So when it comes to reading comprehension passages, reading comprehension task, time consuming is something that probably bothers people. It's always there on their mind. But that again comes from the fact that maybe you're looking for things which is somewhere not necessary. You're focusing on things which are not necessary. So you're actually making it look more complex than it actually is. So somewhere the mindset needs to change. So my idea behind today's session is to at least make those reading comprehension tasks a little easy for you to solve. That's basically the motive I have when it comes to today's session. So, hello. Has my camera, is it frozen by any chance? Do you see me on the screen? Hello. Hello. Hello, am I audible? Can I get a quick yes on the Q&A box if you guys can still hear me? All right, okay, thank you so much. All right. There was a slight glitch there on my end, I believe, with the Zoom application, but I believe it's okay now. So very quickly, okay, before we get to the actual topic, a quick overview of, what the GRE is, and generally speaking, I don't want to talk a lot about it, but just a quick overview. So the GRE exam is something that you prepare for if you're planning to go for your education abroad, especially for your graduate schools. or graduate programs. So the GRE exam, in a way, serves the purpose of boosting your academic competence. So if you're applying to any school for your graduate program, you're expected to apply with a GRE score. But the reason why they ask you for a GRE score is because it, in some ways, is adding value to your academics. So when the admissions committee is looking at your application, they look at your academic aspect also, right? So they look at your CGPA, correct? So if you want to sort of make your CGPA look a little better, if you want your CGPA to look a little impressive. So for example, let's say you have a slightly low CGPA and you wish to improve it, but you don't have a chance to improve it, for example. The GRE exam score, or whatever good score if you get on a GRE, will automatically make that academic bracket look a little better. So a slightly low CGPA can be compensated in a way by actually getting a good GRE score. So GRE score does that job of boosting your academics. So the purpose of writing this exam is to boost your academics, in simple words. Again, having said that, when you apply to schools with your GRE score, beyond your academics, there is another reason why you want to sort of consider this exam. Is that when you actually prepare for this exam, there are specific skills which are being tested. Now, generally speaking, when you go for a graduate program, like you go to any school for a graduate program, whether it's master's or PhD level programs, okay, you are somewhere expected to have two basic skills. One is logical reasoning skills, which is like a minimum expectation they have, and the other is analytical skills. So when you're applying to any graduate level program, you're expected to have logical reasoning skills and analytical skills. So this exam, the GRE exam, in a way proves that you have the logical reasoning skills required to survive over there, during your master's program, or for that matter, even the analytical skills that you prove through GRE exam will sort of give them an idea that you're analytically strong as well. So all in all, this exam is serving that purpose as well, as to when when you're applying for a master's program, the admissions committee needs to know that you possess those skills in you. So this exam is doing that job as well for you. In a way, if you score well, you're proving something to the admissions committee in this sense, right? So that's another reason why you would like to write this exam, of course, beyond all that is being said. So this is a general sense of the test. Now, when it comes to the GRE verbal section particularly, and when I say generally verbal section, out of the three sections, which is analytical writing, quantitative reasoning, and verbal reasoning, in the last two sessions that I did cover a lot about the scoring scheme and all these things in the past. I don't want to, spend a lot of time on it again, but generally speaking, the verbal and quant sections are scored together, as 130 being the minimum on verbal and 170 being the maximum. Similarly, on quantitative reasoning, 130 being minimum, 170 being maximum. So the combined score range is from 260 to 340. That's your overall score range on the GRE, which is a combination of verbal reasoning score plus quant reasoning score. Keep that in mind. But this score is separately given to you and is not combined with the analytical writing score. That is because I did cover this in the last couple of sessions. If you want to go on our YouTube channel, you can go and check those videos. I have clarified as to why the scoring is separate. But a very quick point here, the analytical writing section is subjective in nature. Hence, the scoring is done separately and the required skill is more oriented towards your subjectivity. So you're expected to express things according to your understanding. So that becomes a different skill set. So your subjectivity is tested on AWA. Hence, the scoring on AWA is done separately, which is on a scale of 0 to 6. This is not combined, with your verbal and quant scores. So that's the reason your AWA scores are separately given to you, and your verbal and quant reasoning scores are done together, but they are not merged with your AWA scores. So verbal reasoning and quant reasoning is the objective part of the test. AWA is the subjective part of the test. Since these are two different skill sets which are being tested in some ways, therefore the scores are not combined together. That's the way you can understand this. Okay. Now, in the verbal reasoning section in general, if I were to look at the verbal reasoning section, one thing that you probably understand is that in the verbal reasoning section, mostly people understand verbal reasoning as something that is more oriented toward English language. I clarified this in the last couple of sessions, but I would like to repeat myself. We are looking at verbal reasoning section not as English language test. Please, understand this as a reasoning test in which English is the medium. Your ability to understand statements, interpret information, analyze information, use your reasoning skills overall is what is being tested in the verbal reasoning section. In all this, English merely becomes the medium. English per se is not exactly being tested. The English language skills are being tested, of course, but that is through IELTS or TOEFL as we know it. So IELTS and TOEFL is something you can consider as English language tests or proficiency tests, right? But those are particularly testing you on your language skills. But the GRE, on the other hand, is a completely different test. Here, your reasoning skills, analytical skills are being tested. So the verbal reasoning section here is not really testing your language skills. So I hope that clears the point that when we are preparing for the verbal reasoning section on GRE, we shouldn't have this mindset that our language skills are directly being tested, our reasoning skills are being tested is the way I should be looking at it. So that's another point you should know. Now, when it comes to the points further in the verbal section, we did look at two kinds of question types last time. I want to just further clarify this, that there are some questions out of 20 questions in every verbal section, for which you get 30 minutes. Out of those 20 questions, okay, 10 questions are of fill in the blank types, which, by the way, you can see on the screen right now that says 6 text completion questions and 4 sentence equivalence questions. These two combined can be considered as fill in the blank questions. So they account for 50% of the verbal section. That is 10 questions out of 20. The other 10 questions are of reading comprehension type, which is passage-based questions, something that we probably know a little bit about because we've done passage-based questions even back in school, right? So these 20 verbal questions are divided into 2 parts. One is the text completion or text equivalence, call them fill in the blank kind of questions. The other 10 questions are passage-based questions, which are based on reading comprehension, or you can just simply call them reading comprehension questions, which is passage-based questions. Okay. Now, when it comes to the reading comprehension task, let's look at some of the strategies. Let's talk about the problems before we actually get to the strategies. When I am looking at a reading comprehension task, generally speaking, there are 2 problems. Number 1, there is definitely a problem with my reading skills. Reading skills as in, if a piece of information is given to me, chances are that I will struggle in how to read and interpret or understand the information some ways. Like when I give you a piece of information, if I give you a passage and I tell you to read, it somewhere becomes a bit of a problem, especially if there is a timer that is running. I need to make sure that I'm able to read and understand complex information quickly. And somewhere I need to be sure that whatever I have read, I've been able to understand it. So one problem that lies ahead of me when it comes to reading comprehension task is reading and understanding information quickly. That's one problem. The second problem, okay, is more about how to solve questions, right? It's about after I've understood this passage, when it comes to questions, I have a different issue altogether. Like I'm not able to find the right answer. I have 2 options mostly, which are, I'm left with 2 options at the end. And mostly I end up picking the wrong answer. So solving questions is a different problem. And reading the passage is altogether a different problem. But when I look at the whole reading comprehension task, I need to address both these problems to make sure that I'm able to solve the reading comprehension questions correctly and quickly. So I'm going to take one problem at a time. The first issue that I want to discuss with you guys today, and the strategy that we will look at, is the patterns and structure over content. Now, this particular patterns or structure over content part is addressing the reading issue, which is the first problem. Reading the passage and understanding it quickly is the first problem, right? So to address the first problem, the strategy we will look for is patterns or structure over content. First thing that will be resolved by this. The second problem is about the solving of questions, as in how do I solve questions correctly and quickly. To address that, we are going to use the strategy of the art of finding faults. Now, and I'll come to this part later, of course, when we get to solving questions. But at this point, understand that first I'm looking at reading the the passage and making sure I understand it perfectly or as well as I can, but without wasting too much time. So to address that, we're going to use patterns or structure over content. But when it comes to solving questions, I'm going to use the art of finding faults. In this manner, I'm able to use 2 steps to address 2 problems, right? I hope this is clear. If you understood whatever I have said so far with respect to the strategies, can you give me a quick yes on the chat box, please? On the Q&A box, that is. If you're able to understand whatever I've said so far, can you give me a quick yes on the chat box, on the Q&A box? A few more yeses will be good, but okay. All right, no problem. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Siddhi, for the response there. Yeah, so first problem, what's the first problem? What's the first problem? How to read the passages quickly without getting into unnecessary details. How to make sure that I read quickly and understand whatever is given to me. To address that issue, we are going to focus on patterns or structure over content. Okay. Now here, give me a minute. I am going to show you something. Okay. Can everybody see the Word document on the screen? A quick yes on a Q&A box will help. Can everybody see the Word document, a blank Word document on the screen? Okay, okay. Cool, cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I'm going to type something on this. Okay. Now, imagine you are the author. Just for a minute, let's just imagine that you are an author. Okay. And this is the first sentence you're writing. Okay. I hope everyone can see what I'm typing on the screen. Okay. Can everybody see what I've written on the screen? I mean, on this blank document. Can everyone see this? A quick yes on the Q&A box will do. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Now imagine this is the first sentence of a passage. Imagine that this is the first sentence of a passage. My question is, if this is the first sentence of a passage, as an author, what am I likely to write after this sentence? In the next few, let's say, lines or paragraphs, what am I very likely to write? What can you expect me to write if this is the first sentence of the passage? A quick response on the Q&A box will help. If this is the first sentence of a passage, what is it that I'm likely to write after this? You can type your response on the Q&A box in case you figured out that if this is the first sentence of a passage, what is it that I'm likely to write after this, following this particular sentence? Remember, think like a layperson would think, not like an expert. Yes, can I get a few responses now on the Q&A box, please? What is it that I'm likely to write after this in this passage? Yes, any responses, please? Quick. What am I likely going to write? What will I likely write after this? What is it that I can write after this as an author? Any responses? No? I mean, I am going to give you a response anyway, but okay, fine. Let me start typing something. Okay. For a minute, let's just say that there are environmentalists who have participated in this conference on environmental pollution. And they made this assertion. They basically claim that EVs are somewhere going to make a significant contribution toward reducing carbon emissions. Okay. So in this case, what I've understood is that basically, okay, what I've understood is that somewhere, okay, there is EVs on one side, and then there are reducing carbon emissions on the other side. And what the environmentalists are trying to do is bridge the gap between EVs and reducing carbon emissions by saying that this EVs are going to make some contribution to reducing carbon emissions. Now, after this, if I think like a layperson, if this is the first sentence, it is very likely that they will mention maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, maybe four, maybe five different kinds of contributions that EVs are going to make toward reducing carbon emissions. Yes or no? If you can just respond as a yes to this particular point, that after this, okay, there could be 4, 5, or maybe 3, or maybe 6 different ways of how EVs are going to contribute toward reducing carbon emissions. Yes or no? A quick yes will do, please, on the Q&A box. Are we likely to have this after this particular statement, the first sentence, where it says environmentalists are going to contribute? Environmentalists are asserting that EVs are going to contribute to reducing carbon emissions. So we can expect that there can be maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 different contributions. Now, if I were to write what those contributions are, I can write it in a very scientific manner. Okay, where I'm talking about exactly the mechanism of EVs and how that mechanism in a way helps in reducing carbon emissions. On the other hand, I can also, furthermore, I can talk about how EVs are going to be more cost effective in a way, helping people drive in a way that sort of reduces carbon emissions. Maybe the way it is more efficient could also encourage people to drive EVs more, and therefore kind of reduce carbon emissions. So the point here is there can be different ways in which EVs in a very technical manner can be explained as to how it is making a contribution toward reducing carbon emissions. Now, whether they are making 4 contributions or 5 contributions, eventually for me, these 4 or 5 points are going to be what? Eventually for me, these 4 or 5 points are going to be contributions. And maybe after this 4th point, they say, however, some other environmentalists or some, let's say, critics of EVs have raised questions on the idea that EVs or that carbon emissions can be reduced by merely using EVs, or that EVs are going to make some contributions, or basically they are raising questions on the contribution that EVs are going to make on reducing carbon emissions. Now here, if I actually understand this passage again after this, right? So far, if I've read this passage, what I've understood is that it talks about certain contributions that EVs can make to reducing carbon emissions. And then, however, then there are certain critics who have actually questioned this whole idea. Okay, now when it talks about contributions, it could talk about contributions in 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways. But eventually for me, all those points are contributions. After which, if critics have come in and they are raising questions on it, they could be raising 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions, 4 questions. But eventually that entire part is going to be what for me? That entire part is going to be one that raises questions on the previous idea, which talks about contributions. Now, if in this case, let's just making a slight change. Instead of conference, I'll say that in a recent study on D.H. Lawrence's work or works. In a recent study on D.H. Lawrence's work. Now, D.H. Lawrence, in case you don't know, is one author. I mean, he's a famous author. Just in case you don't know, it's all right. So in a recent study on D.H. Lawrence's work, many, instead of environmentalists, I'm going to make literary historians. Instead of asserted, let's say, I make it opined that instead of EVs, yes, Devinder, you have a question? You can type your question on Q&A, Devinder, in case you have a question. Instead of that, I made opined that his works. Oh, okay, I thought you raised your hand. So his works, instead of this part, have, or instead of make, I'm going to say made a significant contribution toward modern literature. Okay. Now just imagine what I have done here. Just see this and compare it with the previous idea. From environmental sciences, okay, I have transformed this into a literature passage. All I have done is I've just changed a few things here or there. Now just imagine, in the previous example, we were talking about how EVs contribute to environmental science, or EVs contribute to reducing carbon emissions. And we saw that these 4 points or 5 points which come after that will talk about contribution of EVs. Right? It will eventually talk about contribution towards reducing carbon emissions. Yes. In this case, okay, we see that there is D.H. Lawrence's works, okay, which makes significant contribution toward modern literature. Now, all that has changed is, instead of the EVs making contributions, in this case, D.H. Lawrence's works are making contributions. There it was making contributions towards reducing carbon emissions. Here the contribution is toward modern literature. So if I actually compare these two parallel, one thing I've understood is that maybe this information is going to change. Again, number of contributions can be 4, 5, 6, whatever. Eventually this portion for me is still going to be contributions. And then here, if I say, however, some critics of Lawrence's work, okay, again, all I'm doing, have raised questions on this idea of D.H. Lawrence making contribution to modern literature, blah, 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 blah. Now, again, after this, there are 3, 4, 5, 6 points which are mentioned, but I see them as what? I see them as a counter to the previous idea. Now, if you see in these two examples that I have given you, you can see it for yourself that all I have done is change the content. The content has changed from something related to environmental sciences, and now suddenly this has become a literature passage. Now, the content per se are not, I mean, I cannot relate literature with more, environmental sciences in my mind anyway. I don't think they're relatable that. But when I actually see what's the commonality, I definitely see that the structure, the pattern is kind of similar to each other. So my point here, guys, is that when you're reading a passage, keep in mind that the content should not make a difference to you. When the ETS makes reading comprehension passages on the GRE, one of the things they claim, and you should probably know this, you can check on the official website as well. One of the claims that they make is that you are not expected to have any prior knowledge on any subject when you're solving reading comprehension, which simply means they don't expect you to be an expert. They don't want you to be an expert on any subject. So in that sense, okay, I am not supposed to read a passage like a subject matter expert anyway. So when I'm not getting into the content, what is it that I'm supposed to look for then in that case? The only way I'm supposed to, understand the passage in a general sense is to get the patterns and structure which get repeated over and over again. Believe me, when you start reading passages with this intention that you want to know the overall structure and pattern of a passage, you will start finding commonalities in different passages. One pattern you will see gets repeated somewhere in the future for sure. Now, this kind of a structure is something you will encounter in the future, where they talk about what it does and what it does not, or maybe talk about what are the claims and what are the counters. This kind of a structure can be used on any topic. The passage can be on archaeology, it can be on anthropology, it can be on marine biology. It wouldn't make a difference to you. So what's really happening here is that when I'm reading the passage, my focus is on something that gets repeated. So I'm much more comfortable now that irrespective of what topic is given to me, I'm going to read it overall, yes. But what I'm trying to gather from it is the pattern or structure, not so much the detail which is given to me, which is very technical for me to understand. If I am stuck in these 4 points, which are very technical to understand, okay, any which way I'm not getting anywhere with it. You're not going to get anything out of it. These 4 points are going to take so much of time that you will eventually feel that, oh my God, I'm reading this, I'm not getting anywhere with it. But if I am focusing more on the patterns and structure in the way it's written, my life becomes relatively easy. At least I'll start making more connection with the passage instead of feeling completely left out. In some cases, you come across passages which are really, really complex to understand. But are they expecting you to understand it thoroughly? No, they are not. So please have this mindset that I'm preparing myself for something that gets repeated over and over again. Like in this case, the pattern or structure, which gets repeated and you will see it as you do more passages. So reading becomes relatively easy if I can find it more relatable than when I'm getting into details. Some people come and say, I'm not comfortable with science passages. I'm not comfortable with literature passages. I'm not comfortable with history passages. Please come out of this mindset, because when you say this, you're actually telling me that the subject is not something you're comfortable with. But no one is expecting you to be comfortable with the subject in the first place. The GRE is very clear in what it states. So let's prepare ourselves for something that can be recognized. And I believe that when you actually start doing this, you will see that the patterns or structure of the passages can be recognized very easily. You see it yourself in the example that I just discussed with you. From environmental sciences, with a similar structure, I was able to make a literature passage. All that has changed is the content, but never the pattern or structure. So in that sense, okay, let me just take you back. So when I say patterns or structure over content, I hope you're now clear what I mean by this, that patterns or structure of passages can be relatively easy for you to understand, and you will see that they can be easily recognized compared to the content, which if you get into the details of the content, it's basically game over for you. Because unnecessary technical details will take a lot of your time. You're not comfortable with it at the end of the day, you will struggle. So please have this mindset that I'm preparing for something that gets repeated over and over again, such as something that I can recognize as patterns of structure over content. Okay, let me give you another exercise to do. Can everybody see this passage on the screen? A quick yes on the chat, on the Q&A box will help. If you can see the passage on the screen. Yes, okay, all right, okay, cool, thank you. All right, now please go through this passage once, okay, and then just sort of let me know if you really get what it says, overall what it says. Okay, all right. Now, if you actually read this passage overall, I mean, generally speaking, I think when you read this passage, what is one thing that you guys could have understood? I mean, to be honest, it's a lot of information. Generally speaking, when you read it, it's a lot of information, and it's very, very technical, if I were to call it that way, because I have never heard of this man Balin. At least I don't know who Bernard Balin is. But when I read it for the first time, it just goes to show that when you read the first sentence, something we just did in the previous example that I discussed with you, if you read the very first sentence, even the second sentence also, his approach in a way helps in interpreting something, right? And his approach is based on four separate propositions. What I understand from the first two sentences is this man is bringing in a new interpretation, and his approach is is sort of based on four separate propositions. After I read this as a normal person, as someone who understands it at a very basic level, what can I understand that will come after this? Going with this example that I just discussed with you, if it says that some X person has contributed to something. Everything I read after that, more or less, as long as it was talking about contributions, could be 4, 5, 6, 7. I read it as one part, isn't it? Now, was I trying to remember every single point in it? No, I was not. I was just trying to gather it overall as different contributions made. And with every question, I will come back to the points as they are being asked. But my point here is that I'm reading the first time. You should read the passage for the first time. And when you read it for the first time, you obviously want to have a general sense of it. When you read the first couple of sentences here, you get to see that there is this new interpretation which is done by this person, but his approach comes from 4 separate propositions. And then it's common sense that they are going to elaborate on how he proposes this idea. According to Balin, the first proposition, and then it talks about that. Secondly, that's the second proposition, and he claims something in that. Balin's third proposition suggests, further he talks about what the third proposition is. Right? And then further says, he asserts that those who were recruited, blah, blah, blah. Right? And then further talks about that. Initially, thousands of unskilled laborers were recruited, further talks about that. Balin argues, again, is the same person who's further adding on to this idea that the colonies were something, something, something. He insists that the colonies were a part of the Anglo-American Empire, but dividing this does make his idea devalue the achievements of the colonial culture. Although he does something, 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 he fails to. It does say there at some point that while he tries to apply his approach, he fails to make a bit of the link between the experience of those people and the political development. So that just gives you a little bit of a negative there. But otherwise, then again, it says, however, the evidence presented in his works again, Balin's works, suggests how we might make such connection. So his evidence in the study that he has done still helps us make some connection, and what that connection is for the talk. Now, generally, if I read this, what does it say? That this person has a specific interpretation about a particular history. And then in that, he's got a specific approach which are based on some propositions. And in that, I am just reading it as, okay, now he's going to talk about propositions. Could be whatever number of propositions. It could be number of arguments, number of ideas. He's talking about this person's ideas overall. That is what this passage is for me overall. If I am trying to mug up everything that he's tried to say, I am not going to get there. Now, I am pretty sure that maybe there were a couple of points in between here that we were not able to understand. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because this is too technical in between. It talks about some regions, some things that we are not very sure of. But if I were to understand every single statement, the general sense of it is not going to get into my head, and it becomes very difficult for you to sustain. So the point here, my friends, is like if I'm reading a passage, I'm trying to follow a particular pattern, a particular structure. I'll try to stick to that structure as much as I can. But this is a kind of structure where the person and his ideas, whether 5 ideas, 6 ideas, 7 ideas are being given to us one after the other. I'm going to see this structure get repeated a lot of times. So for me, the general sense helps in getting the pattern or structure of the passage. I'm not trying to delve into the unnecessary details, because if I do that, the passage anyway becomes very difficult to relate. Very, very difficult to relate in general. Okay, so in simple words, I think this particular passage again was a little complex in how it's stating the ideas, but I'll try to keep it in mind as, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever number of ideas is given to me, I've kept it in my head. You start making notes and all that, you can go on and on with it, you'll never be satisfied with your notes. So the idea is that with every question, I've anyway come back to the passage. So it's never going to end that way, but don't try to make this a more complicated process for yourself by trying to read every single thing, and reading over and over again will not help you understand or not make you understand better. So that's the idea here, right? Now, moving on to solving the questions. This we've talked about so far is more related to how to read a passage. But when it comes to solving questions, I would like to tell you that we will take a 3-step approach when it comes to solving questions. First, we will try to locate information. That is, once we've read the passage and we've read the question tells us what to look for. And so the interpretation of the question has to be very clear. You misinterpret a question, your location will be wrong. Let's say the question is written in a certain way, it's asking for a specific thing, but you end up locating it somewhere else because you've not understood the question correctly. So obviously, when you misunderstand the question, the location is bound to go wrong. And somewheres in reading comprehension, when the first step is wrong, everything that follows that will also go wrong. So the first step is very important as to when you read a passage, you read the question, you should know what the question is exactly asking you to look for, and that helps you locate correctly. Once the location is fixed, then the location in the passage is supposed to be matched with the options. That's called information matching. But do not expect the words will match as it is. You are expected to match the sense. So whatever is the sense of what is written in the passage should be considered as somewhat relatable with what is mentioned in the options. The sense must match. Don't expect the information to be identical in matching, right? Then comes the third point, which is elimination. Now here, I'll tell you what finding faults means. Please remember that when the reading comprehension questions are made, they say which of the following best describes, which of the following best answers this question. When they say which of the following best answers the question, does not mean that it has to be the best answer ever. They say which of the following best answers doesn't mean the answer you pick has got to be a 100% perfect answer choice. They don't expect that anywhere. They don't want you to pick an answer that is a 100% perfect answer choice. Out of what is given, which is the best? So now in this case, you would probably want to choose an answer that is right. But if you go with that intention, mark my words, you'll start making mistakes on reading comprehension. When you start looking for the right answers, that is the day you start making more mistakes on reading comprehension. This just goes without saying, but you try it for yourself if you want. When you start looking for right answers, you will start making mistakes on reading comprehension. Here's what you should be doing. I just said that they do not make a perfect answer choice. Even if you choose an answer choice, it is because it is the least worst out of the given lot. There are, let's say, 5 options. One with the least number of faults will remain. You're not choosing it because it's a perfect answer choice. Please make this very, very clear to yourself. Have this mindset if you can. You're not choosing an answer choice because it's perfect. You're choosing an answer choice because it has least number of faults compared to the other options. The day you start looking at things this way, chances are you're going to make less mistakes. Otherwise, you're very likely to look for an answer, and unless the answer is 100% convincing to you, you won't choose it. So this process takes forever because you want an answer choice to be 100% correct. And there is no such answer choice, as I said. Okay, so in elimination technique, we will focus on finding faults. Now, finding faults again are based on certain reasons. One of the reasons could be based on location. One of the reasons could be based on information. One of the reasons could be based on certain unnecessary comparisons. And one of the reasons could be use of language in an extreme sense. Either ways, we can talk about this at length some other time, but generally speaking, there are some approaches we take when it comes to eliminating choices and finding faults in the options. Now, there is this passage, if you can go through this real quick, and then there is this question on the right that you can solve. You have to pick 1 out of 5 options that are given to you, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, you're supposed to pick 1 out of 5. Okay, but then before that, just make sure you go through this passage real quick before you answer this. Okay. I believe you were able to go through this passage in general. I think if you look at the passage overall, what does it talk about? Again, without trying to get into technical details, just try to understand this as a general, like someone who's generally trying to understand. It's like a layperson. Okay. If I read the first sentence, what does it say? It says, when speaking of Romare Baden, one is tempted to call him a great Black American artist. Now, that one, 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 is a general thing. When you say one is tempted to say, one believes this, one can believe that, one says this. So, this word one, ONE, refers to something that is general, not specific to one person. This one is a general statement. So when it says one is tempted to call him a Black artist, basically telling you that the general sense of it is that he's called a Black artist. Everything you see after that must be what? You must pretty easily understand that whatever it says after that, the subject matter of this is certainly Black. Portrayals are given to you in a certain way. It's very technical. You want to understand. I also wasn't able to understand. Even if you're getting it, I'm sure if you're getting it, great. At least I can't get those technical details then. So I'm trying to just get the general sense of it. That, you know, there are certain things which were portrayed, and there were natural harmony in the choice of the subject matter, whatever. This just tells me a general sense as to why he's called a Black artist. The general sense. But immediately the next part it says, then why not call him a Black artist? Then it further goes on to tell me that Baden says, you can see in this part, it says, Baden says what I'm trying to do is this and something. So when you read the second part, it says why he should not be called a Black artist, because Baden prefers to call himself something else. Now, when I see the first part talks about the general sense of why he's called a Black artist, second part talks about why he should not be called a Black artist. Simple. So in a general sense, that's what I can get out of this. Why he's considered, why he's not considered. Okay. Now coming to the question, it says author of the passage is chiefly concerned with. Chief concern basically means main idea, primary purpose, main purpose, central theme, central concern, central idea, main idea, go on and on. Basically, they all mean the same thing. Okay, so you're actually trying to get the overall sense of this passage. So remember, it should cover the part which says why he's considered a Black artist generally and why he's not called a Black artist according to his own understanding. It should cover the whole thing. It cannot cover only one part of it. Now, remember when I talked about patterns and structure a while back, remember that the pattern and structure of this overall passage is going to help me solve this question. If I get into minute, unnecessary details, being able to solve a question that is talking about main idea of the passage is a little difficult. Because when you're into every single detail, no, the overall idea is very difficult for you to gather. But if you understand that it talks about general sense of why he's called a Black artist, why according to him he's not a Black artist, generally speaking, if you keep it that way, the general sense should help, especially with chief purpose, main idea kind of questions. Okay. Now, drawing your attention particularly to that option E. Tracing Baden's progress. Take this word progress into account for a minute. This is the kind of word that you may come across, especially on the day of your exam. Okay, so this word progress, generally speaking, is a word that shows development, which means the structure of the passage should show a transition from basic to advanced. That's the structure of the passage, which means the passage should show that his maturity was not that great. Initially, he was not that matured, but he transitioned into someone very mature. If that is the kind of transition it shows, progress or development will make sense. Is the structure of this passage going with transition of basic to advanced? You can quickly answer it on Q&A. Is it showing a transition from being very basic artist as matured, not matured, to someone who becomes very matured? Is that the sort of transition it shows? If you want to respond in a second on Q&A, perfect. Otherwise, I think you pretty much understand that it's not showing any such transition, that he was not very matured and he became a matured artist. There is no such transition. It's about why he's considered Black artist generally, why he's not. That's about it. But any transition of maturity as an artist, no transition. So basically, for a word like progress, there needs to be transition, and that structure is not there in this passage. That's a different structure. We'll come across that in the future. You'll be able to match. So the structure doesn't go with option E. So the fault here is not that it's matching with the structure. That's the fault. The word progress that goes out. D says pointing out Baden's helpfulness to other help minority artists. Now, helping minority artists is mentioned, but that is at the end of the first paragraph. At the end of the first paragraph, it talks about helping some minority artists a little bit, maybe yes. But that portion is covering what? That particular point is overall focusing on what? It's focusing on why he's considered a Black artist. But is it covering the second half where he says that he's actually doing something universal? Is it covering why he should not be called a Black artist? No. This particular option D is addressing only the first half, not the second half. So D goes out. Now, when it comes to this particular option that says B, it will focus on B for a minute, acknowledging Baden's success in giving artistic expression to Black American experience. Now, option B again talks about acknowledging Black American experience, which is something that calls him a Black artist. That is again addressed in the first half. Is it talking about in the second half about Black, addressing only Black, or is the second half addressing universal aspect? So if you read the second half, he talks about amplifying and universal. So the option B particularly talks about Black American experience, which is addressed in the first half, not in the second. So why I removed D is the reason why I'm removing B as well, because both B and D are addressing only the first half. Now, if you read option A, it says discussing Baden's philosophy of art. Now, please understand this. It says Baden's philosophy of art. Baden's philosophy of art refers to Baden's idea of art. Baden's idea is described where? In the first half or second half? I just mentioned it to you. It says in the first half, one is tempted to say this. So the first half covers a general perspective, but not Baden's perspective. That comes in the second half. So when it talks about discussing Baden's philosophy of art and what he thinks about art is mentioned in the second half. Now, the reason I removed B and D was because it was covering the first half, not the second. Similarly, in option A, it covers the second half, which is about Baden's idea. But does it cover the first half, which talks about a general perspective? No, it doesn't. So I told you that when it comes to a main idea, it should cover the entire passage. B and D cover the first half, not the second. So both of them are out. A covers the second half, but not the first. So therefore that is out. What are you left with? Now is option C. Now here the word assessing. All right. Let me just tell you how the word assess goes with the structure of this passage. You remember back in school, you had assessment reports after every examination. So if you remember, examination report or assessment reports were given to you. Normally, when I ask people what is an assessment report, they say assessment report is anything that tells me about my grades. Actually, when you look at it closely, that's not why you call it an assessment report. An assessment report is what tells us about what you possess and what you lack, what you've done and what you've not, what is and what is not. That's basically why you consider it as an assessment in the first place. So the assessment report consists of both what you possess and what you don't, what you have and what you don't have. Now consider the passage in this case and the structure of it. Why he's considered a Black artist, why he's not considered a Black artist. I hope you're able to make that, able to bridge these two ideas, guys, because what I'm trying to show you is the patterns and structure of a passage do relate with the words that match the structure. Now, it talks about why he's considered, and the ethnic element here is the word Black in his work. They're considering as to why he's considered Black as an artist in an influence of it, and why he's not, why he is, why he's not, covering the assessment. So in a way, if you can draw parallels that way, I think you can understand why the structure goes with the overall idea of the passage. Similar to that, but this next question, I don't think we have a lot of time for that, but just very quickly, a minute or two, I'll just read this question for you. It says the author suggests that Baden should not be called a Black artist because. Now, in terms of location for this particular question, it talks about why he should not be called a Black artist. We saw this passage and we were able to realize that first half talks about why he's considered a Black artist. Second half talks about why he's not considered a Black artist. So when I look at it overall, it talks about why he is and why he's not, right? So if I look at that now and look at this, I'm looking at the second half, not the first, because first half talks about why he is considered. in a general sense. But the second part talks about why he's not considered. Now, looking at the second half, it says that because the categorization is too narrow and what he's trying to stand up for eventually is the structure, what he's trying to do is amplify. Amplify would be broadening it. And what he's trying to do is something universal. Now, universal and amplified tells you that he should not be called a black artist because that is very narrow. And what he's trying to do is universal. So narrow and universal is the reason I'm supposed to be considering that black will be narrow. Hence, don't call him black, call him universal in a sense, right? So why should he not be called a black artist? Because he's doing something universal, amplifying. Let's see the options. A says there are many collages by Baird in which the subject matter is not black. Now, subject matter and collages, by the way, of his works are mentioned in the first paragraph right at the start. And it says subject matter is certainly black. So subject matter is not black anyway is wrong. Plus this location is in the first paragraph, not in the second. So on the basis of location, I can see a fault in this option. This is out. B says Baird's work reflects Black American experience in a highly individual style. Now, highly individual is what option B says. But in the paragraph, it says he's trying to do something universal and amplify. Universal and amplify and highly individual are what to each other? Obviously opposite. Now, given they are opposite, D goes out because it's not going with the universal nature of it. C says through the structure of Baird's art, his black subjects come to represent all of humankind. Now, all of humankind and universal are what kind of options? Relatable? Keep this. We can't choose it, keep this. Baird's true significance lies not so much in his own works as in his efforts to help other minority artists. He does help minority artists, but that's in the first half, not in the second. So that's anyway out. E says Baird's work uses ancient Black Kingdom of Benin. Again, first half, not the second. That goes out. You're left with C, which, by the way, again, if I remove the other options on the basis of faults, you're left with option C, which talks about humankind overall matching with universal aspect. So I think generally speaking, okay, the words that I wanted to show you are these. These are specifically reading comprehension vocabulary words, which I have compiled that help you solve reading comprehension questions, understanding specific words and, questions particularly where you can make mistakes or understand structures. All these words mean something, but with specific structures. That's what we're trying to do. All in all, if you can follow the strategies, I think when it comes to the verbal section, getting a 155 is pretty much in your reach. Similarly, if you follow the basics in quant, a 165 is totally in your reach. Believe me, when I show you these numbers are not unrealistic. These numbers are totally achievable, but by only sticking to the basics and having a strategic approach in place, overall, a GRE 320 then becomes realistic for you, right? Anyway, in general, I think when it comes to the preparation that we here at ACC give you, it includes, of course, we try to include the course according to your requirements. We are trying to bring in, courses which suit your needs. So we can have more specific verbal related programs. We have both verbal plus quant programs based on online and offline mode that you wish to attend accordingly and give you as many questions as possible for practice. Also give you access to the official questions from the ETS. The entire focus of our preparation that we give you here at ACC, primarily we focus on giving you official questions to solve. Because the more official questions you solve, the better you get at the GRE exam eventually. That should help. So that's the idea. And overall, we try to keep it a no-nonsense approach for your GRE prep. That's about it from my side. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take. We've overshot by 5 minutes, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. Any questions? Any questions you have? You can put it on the Q&A box. There's a Q&A box. You can post your question on it. I'll be more than happy to assist and answer your questions in case you have any issues. Devinder and Ajay, note taker Ajay and Siddhi. If you have any questions, please let me know. Any questions? No? Siddhi, Devinder, and Ajay? All right. In case you do have any questions, you can always mail me on Rohan, ROHAN dot LAKHNE, Rohan, LAKHNE, Lakne at AECCglobal.com. All right. Thank you, Devinder. No problem. I hope I was able to convey my idea very clearly to all of you. But thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate your time. Anyway, you can always reach out to us for any questions. We'll be more than happy to assist. And thank you so much. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.